we've got the Brute. The Brute is not the best class in the game, but in this ultimate guide, I'm going to show you exactly how to use the Brute and how you can make him much more effective. And it's actually quite easy to be ineffective with the Brute because of the Brute's initiative. So we're going to talk about some strategies on how to manage that, whether you should go damage dealer or tank, and what cards you should be taking depending on which path you take. And let's give you an example here. So a card like Sweeping Blow, because of the Brute's poor initiative, it's really easy for Sweeping Blow to blow up in your face because one enemy dies, another moves away, and then you're left doing an attack 2 on one enemy. So in this guide, we're going to talk about exactly how you fix that problem. Even though the Brute has some of the worst initiative in the game, he's not actually the slowest. He's just got so much middling initiative that it makes your life a nightmare. Sometimes you're going to go before all the enemies. Sometimes you're going to go after all the enemies. Sometimes there's going to be 1 or 2 enemies that go before you and then the rest go after you. Despite that fact, the Brute has some amazing card combos that can do really good burst damage. So go ahead, like this video, subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications so that when I put out new content, you're notified. Let's dive into this Brute guide so I can show you how the Brute works best. So I've talked a lot about the Brute's bad initiative, and I'm going to talk some more about it because it's the greatest hurdle to being effective with the Brute. So to be effective, usually you need your plans to go the way you've planned it. And with the Brute, that's really tough. So accept the fact that you have terrible initiative. Don't always try and go first. Accept the fact that you have bad initiative and make plans that aren't always specifically based on what your initiative is. So because your initiative puts you in a bad spot all the time, it's sometimes better to just go late instead of trying to go early and gamble. When you're going with an initiative of 20 or 25 or 35, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, some enemies are going to be slower and you're going to have a little bit of a better idea, but generally you're going to have a hard time figuring out if you're actually going to be going first. So if you go late, then you can see where all the monsters are positioned and you can go in and use something like Sweeping Blow. And like the example I gave in the beginning of the video, if you use Sweeping Blow wrong, you can just pile up ineffective turns. And there's other cards, other AoE cards that the Brute has where you can become completely ineffective because your plans are, going to hell. The enemies aren't where you expect them. Your ally comes in and kills one of the enemies, so you're only doing a couple damage. And this compounds, and means you're going to be very ineffective in scenarios. So lots of the time go late. And then save, your very fastest cards, which there aren't many of, and they're still not super fast. I believe the fastest is 10 with Provoking Roar. So save, those couple of cards you have for going fast when you really need to go fast. And the rest of the time, go ahead and go late. It's okay. Or, do turns that don't depend on, exact timing. It's a Brute. You should be able to tank, right? And you can, although the Brute is definitely not the best tank in the game. And early on in the Brute's life, when you're at low levels, tanking ability is not really there. So let's talk about 2 of the early tanking cards. We've got Juggernaut and we've got Warding Strength. So if you take Juggernaut and you use the bottom, you've got to play Warding Strength first. So when you're taking damage, you can decide in which order things happen. So let's say you have a Prosperity level 1 item, Hide Armor. You can decide to use a charge of that to take 1 damage off. And so combining that with Warding Strength allows you to absorb those little hits with that and not use Juggernaut for that. Because if you go out and you get hit for 1 damage and you've got nothing else with you, you don't have the Hide Armor, you don't have Warding Strength up, you're going to be pissed when you have to use a charge of Juggernaut for 1 damage. One other point I'd like to make about tanking is that I think you need to decide early on whether you're going to go tank build or whether you're going to go more for like a mobile damage dealer, burst damage deal kind of build, because you're going to make some very different choices. For shielding, relying on going first is going to get you in some trouble. So if you are shielding up, make sure you use your fastest cards. If not, just expect that sometimes the enemies are going to go before you. So, be careful around that. and use things like Juggernaut, Warding Strength, and Defensive Tactics, because those are going to be up all the time. And those are really your bread and butter cards when you're running a tank build. If you're relying on going first and getting shield up on that turn, quite a few times you're going to be disappointed. Okay, let's talk about starting cards. So I'm not going to go through every single card, but I'd like to go through a couple cool combos and just talk about a few cards that are noteworthy. So the first is going to be a combo of Leaping Cleave Bottom and Provoking Roar Top. I like to come out with this. Go ahead, go fast. You can jump, you're maneuverable, you make wind, and that's going to be for the next turn. And then you get in there and you quickly attack and you disarm an enemy. It's a nice, strong first play. Then next turn, you're going to use the top of Skewer and the bottom of Wall of Doom. And you can have an attack 5 on 2 different enemies with Pierce 1. Especially early on, this is going to be a very strong, reusable attack. So try it out. Let me know what you think. The next is Trample. Trample is one of those cards that it's great if you have shielded enemies, and it's pretty mediocre if you don't. So take a look. Even in the new books where the scenarios are only loaded up 1 room at a time, like, starting with Forgotten Circles, that sort of stuff. So even if you're only loading up 1 room at a time, you can see which enemies are in there and determine whether to take Trample or not based upon whether there's going to be shielded enemies. So yes, you are allowed to look at the enemies before you decide which level 1 cards to bring in with you. So make sure you're always doing that. It's going to help you to strategically bring the right cards for for certain enemy types. The next is Provoking Roar, and it's one of my favorite starting cards. Going fast is good. Going fast with Disarm is great. And it's going to be your fastest initiative card. Make sure you're pretty much always taking that. And then Overwhelming Assault. I don't want to say this, but I'm going to. It should be called Underwhelming Assault. It is absolutely terrible. 6 for a loss is not that good. Move 3, push 2 can be useful, but the initiative really sucks. I would say it's one of the worst cards you've got. So usually I'm going to leave that one behind. If you think there's a lot of traps around or something, you may be able to take it just to push enemies into the traps. Up next, I'm going to be talking about each pick at each level. So going through which cards to take, depending on whether you're a damage dealer, depending on whether you're a tank, level by level. But first, if you could, go ahead, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that when I create new content, you're notified. And also, I've created another video I think you're really going to like, where I go ahead and I rank all 22 of the Gloomhaven classes, including Forgotten Circles and including Jaws of the Lion. So go ahead, check that out, and see how your favorite classes stack up against the rest of the classes in the Gloomhaven universe. At level 2, we've got Juggernaut and we've got Fatal Advance. Juggernaut top is good utility. Moving and attacking is really nice, and you're going to find it pretty useful. The bottom is also good if you're going for a tank build, but make sure you're pairing it with Warding Strength. Make sure you've got some armor so that you're not using Juggernaut charges on low damage attacks. You want to make sure and save those for those big hits, and so you need some other ways to mitigate damage when it's coming in small amounts. Fatal Advance is a good card as well. Killing an adjacent normal enemy is decently powerful, and the bottom move 4 is going to be nice for the brute. At level 2, it depends on what playstyle you're going with, and this goes back to what I was talking about before, and that is, decide whether you're going damage dealer, attack kind of brute, or you're going tank brute. At level 3, we've got Hook and Chain and Brute Force. Hook and Chain is a decent top attack. It would be better if it was a push instead of a pull. It's much easier to push enemies into traps than to pull them, but I guess you couldn't really call it Hook and Chain if you did that. And then the bottom move 4, an attack in a straight line. This sounds good, but in theory it's actually much harder than you think. So you actually get a lot less use out of it than you initially would think. Brute Force is just a straight upgrade to Sweeping Blow. It does muddle the enemies. Make sure, though, you're going fast so that, you're not getting hit by non-muddled enemies. And then the move 2 shield 1 is great. The initiative is brutal on this card. 51 is basically a nightmare. So make sure that when you're doing that move to shield 1, you're pairing it with something fast, something like a provoking roar or something else that has good initiative. So at level 3, I'm going with brute force most of the time. At level 4, we've got Unstoppable Charge and we've got Devastating Hack. Unstoppable Charge is a nice, powerful attack 5, repeatable for an experience. It's going to be great in mostly every situation. And the bottom is an awesome move with a stun all adjacent enemies. It's very powerful and it's going to be one of those cards you pull out that's going to help you win scenarios. Devastating Hack is pretty powerful, but think of it this way. You get to use it one time, you do 3 more damage than Unstoppable Charge. Long term, Unstoppable Charge is vastly going to outperform Devastating Hack. And for Devastating Hack, you're going to not use the loot 1 at the bottom that much. You know, Brute needs to position a lot because of that poor initiative and because you're using, you know, some stuff like Sweeping Blow where you want to be able to hit as many enemies as possible. You're not going to get a ton of chances to use the loot 1. So take Unstoppable Charge every single time. At level 5, we've got Skirmishing Maneuver and we've got Whirlwind. And this one's going to be tough, and I'm going to talk about why. So first, we've got Skirmishing Maneuver. It's got a ton of utility for positioning, but it's 2 attacks at 2 damage each, and so that's a little bit weak. The bottom is good, but it's not as good as you think because the Brute actually wants to position quite a bit. And lots of times when you're going to burst damage, you're going to want to go melee and melee, not ranged and melee. Because if you go ranged bottom and melee top, you're very often going to be adjacent and you're probably going to be at disadvantage. If you are going to burst damage with it, do a double ranged, you know, bottom of Skirmishing Maneuver and top of Spare Daggers. Whirlwind is another good card though too. So at 4 players, you can very often pull off a 12 to 16 damage attack with this, and that's definitely going to be worth a loss. And then the bottom, move 4, it gives us another good move at 28 initiative, and it allows us to push 3. Push 3 becomes very powerful because a higher push makes it a lot easier to push enemies into traps. So on this one, at 2 players, I'm probably going Skirmishing Maneuver, but at a 4-player count game, I'm probably going to go Whirlwind because of those increased enemy counts, and you can get some serious burst damage going. You know, 12 to 16 damage, if you can hit 3 to 4 enemies, is going to be really good. At level 6, we've got Quietus, and we've got Immovable Phalanx. Quietus top is decent, but it's kind of annoying because you can kill a stunned enemy, but a stunned enemy is something that's already been, you know, taken care of to a certain extent. So lots of times you want to be focusing on something else. So it's okay, but it's kind of annoying. The move 3, add +1 attack to all of your attacks this round is pretty good. That's nice and strong. And then we've got Immovable Phalanx. The top is great utility, attack 4, shield 1, and at 17 initiative for the Brute, it's quite good. And then the bottom, though, is the really interesting part of this card. And it's going to make for some insane combos that I'm going to talk about here at levels 8 and 9, which is actually going to take your Brute game up substantially, and it's going to allow for some really cool burst damage. At level 6, I'm almost always taking Immovable Phalanx first, but Quietus is also a very good card. At level 7, we've got Defensive Tactics and we've got Crippling Offensive. Defensive Tactics top is quite good for controlling melee enemies. And the bottom is essential for any tank build. So if you're a tank build, this is your best card, bar none. It's persistent. You get out there, you play it turn 1, you're going to have shield 1 up all the time. Combine that with a warding strength, you're going to have shield 2 up for the next 6 attacks at least. And then you can use other stuff like Juggernaut to take the really big hits. Use some armor. You're actually going to be a relatively effective tank, although still not the best in the game. And then we've got Crippling Offensive. The top is, it's okay for level 7. If it was level 3, I'd probably be a lot more thrilled. But 6 damage is a little bit below the curve. And I know you add in a wound, it's up to 7 and you stun. So it can be useful at times, but for a loss, it's a little bit underwhelming. The 3 XP is nice though. And then the move 3 immobilize push 1 is actually relatively decent as well, because you can push an enemy away And especially a melee enemy, you're going to be able to neutralize them by pushing them and freezing them there so that they're not going to be able to attack you. So at level 7, I'm going with defensive tactics almost all the time, even if you're going for a damage build. Having that shield when retaliate up is really nice, or you can use that top to really take care of enemies. At level 8, we've got Selfish Retribution and we've got Frenzied Onslaught. Selfish Retribution top is awful. If you are using this, you're probably very selfish. It's one of those cards that, I mean, it just shouldn't. A move 1, loot 2 is not very good. Use it at the end of the scenario if you've somehow managed to keep it that long and the scenario is well in hand and you just want to get, greedy and hoover up some loot. That's cool. The move 3 retaliate 2 bottom is actually fairly decent. And at 12 initiative, it's pretty good. But we've got Frenzied Onslaught. And the top of Frenzied Onslaught is really, really good. Move 2, attack 2, move 2, attack 2. And here's why it's good. So pair it with a movable phalanx. You've got attack 2, attack 2, attack 2, attack 2. Then you use balanced measure bottom, and you can burst for a minimum of 16 damage. And it's almost always going to be more than that. So you've got a reusable combo here of Frenzied Onslaught top and balanced measure bottom. Once you've got the bottom of a movable phalanx out, and you can use your moves as attacks. And so very powerful burst damage there. I use it a lot. And so go ahead, try it out. Let me know what you think. So I am going to take Frenzied Onslaught most of the time here because I like to use a movable phalanx. If not, you can take Selfish Retribution if you've gone full tank and you think you're better sitting there and getting up a good retaliate and being shielded. At level 9, we've got Face Your End and we've got King of the Hill. Face Your End top is pretty lame. I rarely would ever use it. But the bottom is decent, although it's kind of annoying because you want to kill someone who's adjacent, but you have to use a top move. So you can pair it with one of the top moves, and it's decently powerful. But for level 9, it's definitely below the curve. King of the Hill, though, is pretty good. So especially if you've got a 4-player game, you've got high enemy counts, you can easily hit 3 or 4 enemies with this, maybe up to 5 if you're a wizard at positioning and you're really good at the game. But let's say you hit 3 enemies. That's going to be 18 attack. You can skip the push, but if you do skip the push, you've got to skip all of the push. So what you do is you do this, you hit at least 3 enemies. Let's say you do 18 damage. Then you use the bottom of balanced measure and you've got a movable phalanx out. And this is another huge burst combo. You come in, you hit 3 enemies for 6 each, plus your attack modifier cards. Then you pull out balanced measure and you whack something for 18 to 24 damage. And so you could easily do 40 plus damage with this combo. I'm pretty much always going with King of the Hill. And also the heal 5 on the bottom is, just gravy. You probably won't use it a ton, but it's still decent for the brute. Okay, let's talk about enhancements. But if you've made it this far, go ahead and like the video, please. So my first enhancement is for 30 gold. You're going to be able to enhance grab and go bottom move, and then pair it with boots and the top of balanced measure for a repeatable 7 attack top at level 1 without losing a card. And, you get your boots back every time you rest. So make sure you use long rest, get those back. You're going to be able to use this combo fairly often, and especially early on. It's really going to help you a lot. And 30 gold is not expensive. The next enhancement is going to be +1 damage to skewer or cleave. I prefer skewer because it's a little bit easier to hit with and it does a little bit more damage. I don't use it on Sweeping Blow as often because, the level 3 card Brute Force is an actual upgrade to Sweeping Blow. So use it on Skewer or Leaping Cleave. It's going to, give you an extra, 6 to 8 damage at least per scenario. And it's going to, take your Brute game up another level. For perks, when on the Brute, I like to take ignore item effects first because then you don't have to put all those negatives in your modifier deck. So even if you're a damage dealer, it's going to help you quite a bit because it's going to, keep that average damage up. And then stay away from Pierce. You can never plan on Pierce, so don't put those rolling Pierces in. You're never planning on it, and so lots of times you're just going to pull it when you're attacking a non-shielded enemy or when you've already got enough damage to kill a shielded enemy, because generally when you're, doing these turns, you have an idea of what you're going to do. And Pierce is just this random wild card that sounds good, but very often doesn't help you a lot. And then get rid of all your negatives and add in your pluses. So fairly straightforward here for the perks. Okay, let's talk about Prosperity 1 items and just a couple suggestions here. Get Hide Armor, but make sure you take the Ignore item effects first from the perks. And then take Boots of Striding. Adding +2 move is going to allow you some more move, of course, and some utility for positioning, but it's also going to give you more damage. Like I said before, when you pair it with Grab and Go, and then you upgrade Grab and Go, you've got a 7 attack with Balanced Measure. And so that's going to be really good, especially early on. And then Warhammer, use Warhammer with something like Sweeping Blow. You're going to be able to stun 3 enemies, as long as you can get 3 enemies in your attack hexes. So go ahead, use Warhammer as well. It's going to be great for the Brute. And then potions, use them in this order. Stam, because I want to reuse combos. I want to reuse Balanced Measure. I want to reuse Frenzied Onslaught, all those things. Brute has a lot of good reusable XP cards too, so I like to go Stamina first, then Healing because you're taking some damage, and then Power Potion so that you can add to your AoE attacks later on. Okay, we've come to the end of the video. If you can, please go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me out a lot. Subscribe to my channel, turn on those notifications so that when I put out new content, you're notified. And thanks so much for watching the video.